The House will come to order. Conference Committee reports on House files.
Conference Committee report. This is the Lanning motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2269, an act relating to elections. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zellers, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2269, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by 2 of the 3 conferees on the part of the House and 3 of the 3 conferees on the part of the Senate. Lanning moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2269 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Clay, Chairman Lanning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That's my motion. The House File 2269 comes back to us from conference essentially as it left the House, with a total appropriation of $750,000 of HAVA monies that would be given to the Secretary of State to fulfill their responsibilities relative to elections. This appropriation still leaves about $1 million in HAVA funds that will be available to the legislature next year and beyond. And members, I want to point out that we have specifically mentioned in this conference report that there will be $50,000 for military and overseas Empowerment Act compliance, $120,000 for support for local government officials, and we're also saying in the report the House language that said with any reductions, the business services provided by the Secretary of State should not be diminished. So, Mr. Speaker and members, we ask for your support.
Discussion to the conference report. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This conference report really turned out very well. I didn't sign the conference report only because I wasn't there when the revisor's office was done with it, but I would have because I support it. Thank you to Representative Lanning and Representative McFarland for being constructive conferees, and I think this will tide over the Secretary of State's office for another year. I also think that the breakdown of the funds is a prudent one. We gave the Secretary of State's office mostly the discretion to do with the money what they want, except for the 2 categories that Representative Lanning talked about. So I urge a yes vote.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was only wondering who didn't sign the report and why, but I think Representative Simon just cleared that up. Thank you.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference report on House File number 2269 say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading as amended by conference.
3rd reading, House File 2269 as amended by conference.
3rd reading is amended by conference. Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Gunther motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 1721, an act relating to economic development. Gunther moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 1721, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
The gentleman from Martin, Chairman Gunther.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the Senate failed to put 2 or 3 of our amendments in there, and I think we have to go correct that error, and I'd like to go to conference.
Discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Hoppe motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2795, an act relating to horse racing. Hoppe moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2795 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
The gentleman from Carver, Chairman Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this is House File 2795, which is going to do some things for the horse racing industry. It's going to overall result in an enhancement of the purses that they're able to offer at Canterbury and I would assume also at Running Aces. It's going to do a few things, and by the way, this was an amendment that was put onto a nondescript veterinary horse racing bill that I had earlier. It will do a few things. One, it's going to increase the limit on the number of tables, not just for Canterbury and Running Aces, but for all casinos in the state of Minnesota, from 50 to 80. It will allow all of these casinos, all the people that have card games now, to have both banked and unbanked games. It will, there is a handout that came out, and the handout is not entirely correct. It does not remove the limits on poker. It moves the limits per hand from $60 to $100 per hand, and it removes the limit on the number of tournaments and the size of the tournaments, or the number of tables, rather, that the casinos are allowed to have. This will help both the non-horse track casinos and the horse track casinos, with the ultimate goal, in my eyes, of helping the purses at Canterbury and helping our equine industry in the state of Minnesota. Mr. Randy Sampson and Mr. Stanley Crooks have met on this and appear to be in agreement, and I think having these two parties in agreement on this is a positive sign for the state of Minnesota and for gaming, and I think with that I would appreciate members acting favorably and would stand for any questions.
Discussion to the Senate amendments. The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the member from Carver yield to a question?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hoppe, have we checked with the tribes, and are they okay with this amendment, or are we going to have a lot of problems in our relationship between the state of Minnesota and the sovereign nations that the tribes represent?
The gentleman from Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Biskins. Since I have been elected, I have been a fan of Racino. I will also add, in the interest of full disclosure, that Randy Sampson, who I believe is the president of Canterbury, is also a constituent and my kid's baseball coach a couple of summers ago, and he's a great coach, by the way. He got my kid, never mind, but he's a great baseball coach. And I have always been a supporter of Canterbury, and I am also, as chair of the Commerce Committee, I like to follow my predecessors, Representative Atkins and Representative Davids. I am a believer in deals and peace in the Valley, and Representative Biskins and members, it is my understanding that there is peace in the Valley on this between the tribal casinos and Canterbury.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the member from Carver can answer directly. The question was simply, do the tribe support this or not? It's a quick yes or no question. Hope he can give me a yes or no answer.
The gentleman from Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield. With that, Representative Biskins, yes, the tribes do support this. It's my understanding that they do.
Discussion to the Senate amendments. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hoppe yield for a question, please?
The gentleman will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hoppe, was this plan introduced as a bill in either the House or the Senate, and has it had any hearings?
The gentleman from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. That is a good question. The original bill that I introduced was only dealing with veterinary medicine. It was non-controversial. I don't think it had any no votes leaving the House. This, I believe I mentioned this on the House floor, that this was a possibility. Elements of this bill have had hearings, but this, what's now in this bill, the amendment that we're talking about, the amendment that the Senate put on, as itself has not had a hearing in the House.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, members, this is deja vu all over again, as they say. And you know what I'm referring to is the bill that we heard last week, which came to us as House File 8, and left here as something very, very different. And that's because when it got to conference committee, it became a completely different bill that hadn't been through the proper process. And it came to us here on the floor for an up or down vote with no opportunity to amend it. And that's what you have here today. You have a big change in some very sensitive policy around gambling. And frankly, I don't really care who's for and against it. To me, it really matters that the public, the people we represent, have not had any opportunity to weigh in on this. So, do I know whether people in my district want this change? No, I don't. Do you? I doubt it very much if any of you really know how your constituents feel, because this has not been through a process that we have here in the House for these kinds of matters. For, you know, whether, I don't think that parties can make private deals and then come to us and say, enact this into law, please, we've decided. Because if this is a matter of law, this is a matter that the public ought to have a chance to weigh in on, not just in a conference committee, but with proper notice and the process that we have here. And so, members, I think this is very, very troubling. It's troubling to me that this is the second time this has happened this session in very, very short order. And as I said on that other bill, if this is the way we're going to be conducting ourselves, watch out. Just watch out, because anything can come to you in this way, no matter what it is. And so I think just as a simple matter of process, we ought to vote this down and send it back to conference committee, because it doesn't belong here. Thank you, members.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thought I was probably behind a couple other folks, but I appreciate very much what Representative Liebling has to say. What I would point out, and I shared those concerns with respect to a couple other bills that came up without much notice, without conference committee hearings. I just wanted to say thank you to Representative Hoppe. He actually brought this to the folks. He brought it to me. I know that Representative Thiessen was aware of it. The intention, I think, of the majority party was to bring this up on Friday evening. That was their original, or maybe it was Saturday, Mr. Speaker. The days are starting to run together. We asked them to give us a little bit more time so that we could talk among our members, but also so that we could reach out to people outside of this body. As we get towards the end of session here, the challenge of holding hearings, that's still what I would prefer. It's what I always prefer. But I do give Chairman Hoppe credit for at least reaching out to us early so that some of us could call a few people and find out how they feel. For example, there's a number of people, after you've been Chairman Davids, when you were chairing the Commerce Committee, when I was chairing the Commerce Committee, we have a pretty good sense of who certain gambling opponents are. One of the responses from the gambling opponents by Chairman Hoppe giving me the opportunity to call around a little bit was that they had an interesting perspective, in that they actually, the couple people that I spoke with said the same thing, which is they would rather have this than a giant expansion in the form of a racino. They saw this as something modest compared to a racino. They actually thought this was a better way to go. And to the extent that it would push off the idea of a racino for a decade as a possibility, they appreciated that possibility very much. That came from gaming opponents. Gambling expansion opponents said that. We also had a chance to visit with some folks in the horse industry, and one thing we learned was that the foaling numbers are literally they've dropped precipitously. They're at 25% of where they were just 3 or 4 years ago. So you've got an industry in Minnesota, in the horse industry, not just the horse racing industry, but our horse industry altogether, is in a very, very challenging position right now. I don't know if that means that Canterbury Park goes out of business in 6 months or a year or 5 years, but what I do know is that the horse industry in general and the agricultural industry that is based on things like the horse industry is very much in a challenging position right now, and that this will help. The final point that I would make, Mr. Speaker, is that to the extent that this brings two entities, namely the Shakopee Band and the Canterbury Park folks together, it's somewhat akin to bringing the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings together to do something positive. I'm not saying that we'll ever get them together. And now we've got, look at these folks up in the gallery, the Vikings fans are now standing out and walking out on me because I said we could bring the Packers and the Vikings together. My point is that they may never come together on the field. They'll always be competitors, but there are things that they can work together on. And this is one of those positive things that benefits the horse industry, also benefits both entities, and for that reason I expect to vote green. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you, Chairman Hoppe, for your work and for giving us an opportunity to reach out and, even without a hearing, at least find out more from the stakeholders about how they feel. Thank you.
The gentleman from Hennepin, the gentleman from Goodhue, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And Representative Liebling, I would suggest that we have had this discussion. We've had this discussion for the last 10 years, really. And I will certainly point out the fact that Representative Hoppe and myself have been always on opposite sides of the Racino issue. Sitting down in Goodhue County, we've got the Prairie Island community with Treasure Island. They are our largest job provider in Goodhue County. And I have always been opposed to the expansion of gambling to Racino. And I never really thought that this would happen, that we would have a coming together of these two sides. I've always been embedded here in wanting to fight for that, for Canterbury to expand in the form of Racino. In fact, I proposed a bill, House File 2999, that suggested this on a much broader scale. So I am very much in favor of this small compromise, as Representative Atkins said, the coming together of two communities that have been at odds for over 10, 15 years. At the risk of being overused, I would absolutely say that this is a jobs bill. Because in talking to Randy Sampson from Canterbury, an individual who I had never had the opportunity to visit with, and to sit down to ask him if there was a compromise here, this person is about the horse industry and about agriculture and the horse industry and horse racing in the state of Minnesota. I found him very open, and I give him a lot of credit to sit down with the likes of the Mystic Lake community, really, and the tribal community, to say, what can we do together, as opposed to always fighting. So I think that is much needed. This is something that we need as a legislature, to get more people, more sides to come together to do our work, where we don't have to be so adversarial all the time. We all know that that's when bills get passed 134-0, when we can all get together and work those differences out. So I would urge a green vote on this, and appreciate the support.
The gentleman from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. As many of you know, first of all, I'd like to thank Representative Hoppe for his really full disclosure, and Representative everybody else working on this bill as well, Representative Kelly, bringing this up at this late date. But to give you an idea of what we need to do to help Canterbury Downs, I live about 150 miles northwest of here, up between here and Fargo. But I had a couple of people contact me over the weekend urging me to support this amendment, that it was something we could do to help Canterbury Downs. They need the help to get their purses higher. And I would like to have seen Racino, but that's not going to happen. But I think this is something we can do to help the horse industry, not just the racing industry, but the horse industry in general, to help give them a more solid footing in Minnesota. So I'm thankful for the amendment and urge your support of this amendment and this bill.
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman Hoppe, would you yield?
The The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from St. Louis.
Representative Biskins asked you a yes/no question, and I'd like a more detailed response. When you say the tribes are in agreement with this, are you talking about all the tribes of Minnesota? Are you talking about an association, or are you talking about some tribes? Because I haven't heard from the tribe back home one way or the other, so I'd like some clarification on that.
The gentleman from Carver, Chairman Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gauthier. I'm not trying to be flip, but I honestly don't know, and my suspicion is that the tribe back home would be in support of this. I honestly don't know that. I would say, in answer to your question, some tribes or an association, but I have not heard from every tribe, and I can't answer you 100%.
Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Chairman Hoppe, for that. Could you tell me specifically what tribes have signed up besides Mid-Wahpeton?
The gentleman from Carver will yield. The gentleman from Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gauthier. I cannot tell you specifically. It's just my understanding that there is a understanding between Mr. Sampson and Mr. Crooks and a broader group. Representative Kelly might be able to answer that with more detail. I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I've tried to be as 100% transparent and above board with this as we can. I have not heard specifically from any tribes that they're in support of this, any of the casinos. It is my understanding that there's nobody that's opposed to this.
Gentleman from St. Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Hoppe, for that answer. It helps me a little bit. I just think we need to be careful when we say tribes are in support of things, because there are 11 different tribes with many different interests, and I understand what you're saying, Chairman Hoppe, and I'm not accusing you of any deceit or anything. I appreciate your honesty and directness.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members of the House, it's really strange that today is the day we have this bill combining gambling and horse racing. I've forwarded to all members of the House 2 articles that have appeared in the New York Times, one today and one I think a couple of weeks ago or so, which talks about the problems to the industry in doing this, about the everything. You could take it right from this handout about the benefit of increasing purses and so forth, and the increase in purses has resulted and how wonderful it is to the horse industry because of the increase in raising horses. If you read those 2 articles in the New York Times, you'll find that part of the increase in horses comes from racing horses that are not fit to race, and that the tracks that have dramatically increased gambling have dramatically increased their numbers of injured horses that often have to be euthanized when they break a leg in the race. If you don't really care about horses, there are multiple stories in these 2 articles about jockeys that have been practically fatally injured, who will spend the rest of their lives on a respirator because they've been thrown off and trampled on their horses. Thrown off and then trampled. One of the things that are totally castigated as being bad are the claiming races, and it turns out that the racetrack in Minnesota has multiple, most of the races are claiming races, where the horse is just, where people have bought the horse in advance. And there's also a whole scandal about even horses that come in last can get part of the purse. I spent some time today talking to members of the racing, to the executive director of the Racing Commission, and also to the veterinarian in charge. And I don't have any evidence that this is a problem in Minnesota, but I think by increasing the connection of gambling excuse me, and horse racing, we're asking for these kinds of troubles to come. And I would suggest that we vote no on this bill, and we leave one as a sport and one as another activity.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Kahn, for bringing up that article. I think Mr. Krieger from our Horse Racing Commission did a good job of putting together a response to that article about what horse racing looks like in Minnesota, and I think that went to all members of the House about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I want to kind of bring up a few of those points that he brought together. Representative Kahn did point out this is not a problem with the horse racing industry within Minnesota, that Canterbury Downs and Running Aces both run a very good operation. In fact, evidence is that states that utilize Racino today actually have fewer issues with their horses, because the more you put money into the purses, the more the horse racing industry produces quality horses, and the more the professionalism of the horse racing industry. So I think that certainly, while some states may not have quite the oversight or regulatory oversight over the horse racing industry as we do here in Minnesota, I would not use that to reflect upon the good folks who are raising our racehorses in the state of Minnesota, the good folks who are raising the hay that those horses eat, the good folks who produce the feed that these horses eat, or the 1,500 people employed by Canterbury Park and by Running Aces in this state. So I don't think that we need to disparage the horse racing industry here on the House floor today, because this is an industry that has done very well for us and is just asking to expand a current business. This is like asking Target to open a distribution center in the state of Minnesota. We're just saying, let's give them an opportunity to increase the ability for them to be prosperous. And I certainly support this and appreciate Chairman Hoppe and Representative Kelly coming together for this compromise. It's one small step towards where we need to be here in the state. Thank you.
Gentleman from Carver, Chairman Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Woodard, for those kind words about the industry. And members, I hope we all listen to Representative Kahn, because what she had to say is very important about the horse racing industry in our country. And I read that New York Times article that day that it came out in the New York Times, and we should all be concerned about that. We are fortunate that in Minnesota, we don't have a horse racing industry like that. We were not mentioned, our state was not mentioned in the article. We have fantastic people that are watching the horses at Canterbury. The staff, the trainers, everybody that works with horses, the veterinary staff. And I would remind everybody that the original bill that we're working on here, and there still is a provision, I believe it's Section 3 of the bill, is allowing the veterinary staff to prescribe lower doses of medicine to our racehorses. We don't have this problem currently in Minnesota, but the underlying premise for this bill, what we originally started with, will allow the Racing Commission to set the limits and allow, essentially what it means is that our veterinarians will be able to prescribe lower doses of Lasix and other drugs to promote and provide an even safer horse racing industry in our state. So Representative Kahn, you are absolutely right on. We should be watching what the industry is doing, and we should all be proud that our horse racing industry in Minnesota does such a nice job for us. Thank you.
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Gautier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just in the interest of openness, since I asked the question of Chairman Hoppe earlier, I have gotten 2 notes. Mille Lacs Band and Fond du Lac support the bill.
The lady from St. Louis, Representative Murphy M.
Mr. Speaker, members, I rise with a question. How did we get to this point? How did the most important bill that we're talking about on this Monday day, which I was led to believe by some was going to be our last day, talking about an issue that passed out of here in an original bill with 133 votes, no opposition whatsoever. And now this has become a big bonus for us. Hey everybody, we've got this new idea that came from the Senate again, came across the building, and we're going to save a whole industry. An industry that's been before us from the very beginning in crisis. Remember Representative Biskins? I told you about this long before you came. When first we had to allow for horse racing, pass legislation that would allow for horse racing. And dummies that we were, I'm speaking for myself, I voted yes. I didn't listen to Jim Rice. And they built the place, and this was long before Sampson's, and they built the place, and then they came right back to the legislature and said, Minnesotans didn't know how to go to horse races. Heck, the people that came out there were supposed to bet $28 per person a day. And they were only betting 4. Minnesotans didn't know how to go to the races. They wanted to sit down. And so now we had to allow them to be able to build some stands so people could sit down because they didn't know how to go to the races. But for the industry, we allowed other things to happen. And then came the number of gaming tables that could be inside the building for card playing. They just needed a few. And then they just needed a few more. And today, we're so lucky in our bonus. We get to do a few more, from $60 to $100, or $60 to $100. Or whatever it is, 50 to 80 tables. And you know what? Running Aces can do the same thing. And this is going to help the industry. And you know what? I still kind of believe that there's people across the state that feel part of the industry. And they think this is going to help them. But Representative Atkins, Representative Hoppe, Representative Kelly, you need to explain to me better. How does the money from the new tables and increasing the amount up to $100, how does that money get divided up with the 3 or 4 or 7 horse breeders in my district? How does the people in the industry from my district get a share of that money? If they don't send a horse to win the bigger purse, does any of that money get out to District 6B or 3B? How do the people that are participating, and it is a tight industry, I know that. I know how much hay it takes, or clover, and feed and grain that it takes to feed a horse, even one that doesn't even dream of running at Canterbury, or the Preakness, or the Kentucky Derby. Our horses kind of dream about showing little kids what the responsibility of raising a large animal is like. That's our horses. And we have an excellent program in my district gives horse riding lessons to those that are physically disabled and challenged. The RIDE program, it's called, run by volunteers. But that's part of the industry too. Does this money get out to those people? Does the money from those dark round tables where people are winning a flush or whatever? Do the people that didn't know how to go to the races, are they betting more than $4 now when they go to the races? Are they even up to the $28 yet? I'd like some answers, and I've never gotten them. But Mr. Hoppe, Representative Hoppe, if you could enlighten me how the money gets out to the industry, other than in bigger purses, I would really appreciate that before we vote.
The gentleman from Carver will yield. The gentleman from Carver.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Murphy. And Representative Murphy, I appreciate your comments. What I can tell you is that 14% of the money that we're talking about here is going to go directly back into purses. I cannot tell you exactly, and I don't know that anybody can, exactly how this is going to impact horse people that raise horses, people that supply fencing, people that supply tack, people that are employed by people that are breeding horses, people that are raising grain or hay for horses, people that are selling buildings to house horses, veterinarians, veterinary students. I can hardly think of anybody that this is going to help, but perhaps Representative Hamilton would be able to shed more light on that, or somebody else. And I'm not. Again, I appreciate your comments. I think they are well taken, and I do think this is going to help the horse industry across the state. I can't give you direct numbers or results on that, but perhaps Representative Hamilton could.
The lady from St. Louis, Representative Murphy M.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hoppe, thank you for that, and I really would like to hear about anyone that knows more than what's already been said about how that money is going to be shared, how this industry is going to grow because of this particular bonus on this bill.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, in contrast to what Representative Woodard said, a quote from the New York Times said specifically, an investigation by the New York Times has found that industry practices continue to put animal and rider welfare at risk. A computer analysis of data from more than 150,000 races, along with injury reports, drug test results, and interviews, shows an industry still mired in a culture of drugs and lax regulation and a fatal breakdown rate that remains far worse than in most of the world. This is the most relevant quote then. If anything, the new economics of racing are making an always dangerous game even more so. Faced with a steep loss of customers, racetracks have increasingly added casino gambling to their operations, resulting in a higher purses, but also providing an incentive for trainers to race unfit horses. At Aqueduct Racetrack in Queens, the number of dead and injured horses have risen sharply since the casino opened there late last year. Now, I am not pretending that these card games are the same as a casino, but it is distinctly moving in the same direction. We're seeing exactly the same arguments that were made in Aqueduct to increase the purses. Now, as I said, I have had conversations with the veterinarian. I have had conversations with the executive director of the Racing Commission. You know, at least in talking to them, you're reasonably confident about what's happening here. But had this bill gone through the process, were we able to put amendments on this bill at this time, there are certain things that one can learn from reading these articles. For example, it would be nice to have punishment for trainers that are even found having one violation of drugs, which we don't have. There are states that have a serious penalty, for example, prohibiting the trainer from future races. It would be nice to have a prohibition of certain drugs that are prohibited in other states, and that's clenbuterol, for example, is prohibited in New Mexico. Flumoxin is something that's prohibited in 2 states. I don't know that Minnesota is one of the 2 states. It's not listed that prohibits it. But these are drugs which have this very serious effect of getting rid of the natural instinct of a horse or any animal to run slower when it's hurt, or to stop when it's hurt. And, I'm convinced that we're trying to do a good job. I'm not convinced that the data exists to show that we are doing a good job. And I think that had this bill come through the ordinary process instead of an amendment just coming from the Senate, we would have been able to at least discuss, should we prohibit some of these things by law? Or I don't know if these prohibitions in other states are through their racing commission or through their law. And just to, in case someone doesn't like somebody from the city who lives in downtown Minneapolis talking about racehorses, I'll have to point out that I spend a certain amount of time with kids in Oregon who own horses, and in fact one of the horses that they own is a great-granddaughter of Secretariat, which is probably closer to great racehorses than most of the other people in this body have.
The gentleman from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had some conversation today about how might this affect the dollars at the tables and getting into purses. I actually have a couple of horse breeders who live in my district, and they're finding it very difficult right now to compete just in the general marketplace as well as the racing industry. In the state of Minnesota, when the individual who raises horses goes to the tracks, the purses are a little bit smaller than they might be in other states that they may compete in, like Oklahoma or Louisiana. And they're concerned that if we don't do something to try to help make this a more viable industry in the state of Minnesota, we're not only going to lose the farmers' jobs who plant the hay and who work with the raising of the grains that we use to feed these horses, or the people who help build the barns and the people who support as veterinarians or people who support other ways of the industry, as well as those people who are at the hands-on jobs at the facilities where horses are being raised. This is a very, very big thing for the state of Minnesota. And what's starting to happen is, as people sit down and look at their balance sheets and look at their profit loss statements, they're saying it's much more profitable to engage in this industry outside the state of Minnesota. And if we'd like to let those jobs walk out of the state of Minnesota, voting red on this would get you that. Voting green would help to breathe some more life into a fledgling industry. And as Representative Kelly pointed out, this has a lot of job provisions in it as well.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Bisgins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Hermantown. I thought we had talked about this before, and I apologize if we have not, but let me lay the numbers out in crystal clear fashion. See, once upon a time, Canterbury Park could compete with racetracks in the multi-state area. And at that time, Representative, Minnesota was breeding approximately 1,700 thoroughbreds a year. Now, we can track this. This is not a make-believe number. Thoroughbreds have to be registered. So it's an easy number to track. We had a thoroughbred owner in earlier this year who said, from the birth of his colt till they stepped onto the track, it cost that owner about $30,000. $30,000 in veterinarian costs, in bedding, in training, in all types of agricultural costs. $30,000. Now, we're at the point, Representative, due to the fact that surrounding states have racinos, the average purse for a thoroughbred race in surrounding states is between $20,000 and $25,000. In Minnesota, it's approximately $8,000. Now, if you're a business owner and you're looking at where you're going to raise these animals, are you going to raise it in a state where the average purse is $8,000? Or are you going to raise it in a state where the average purse is $25,000? Well, members, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out. And it doesn't take an actuarial accountant to know that the number of thoroughbreds raised in the state of Minnesota last year was just over 100. From 1,700 thoroughbreds a year to 100 at $30,000 a thoroughbred. You want to ask how this benefits the state of Minnesota, the agriculture industry throughout the entire state? I think it's a pretty simple answer. And these are all not make-believe and hypothetical numbers. These are all numbers you can look up. The fact that Canterbury Park is not competing with tracks around the multi-state area is crippling our agricultural community throughout the state of Minnesota. Now, that might be fine with you, okay. But this issue is not a Shakopee issue. It's not a Canterbury Park issue. It is an agriculture issue throughout the state of Minnesota. One of your members knew this a few years ago when he put Racino into the ag bill he was chairman of. It's too bad he didn't impart that wisdom on to the entire membership. Please vote yes for the little help we can give Canterbury Park and the ag community throughout the entire state.
Gentleman from Cottonwood, Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I'd just like to reiterate, first of all, I'd like to thank Representative Hoppe and Kelly for bringing the groups together, because this is going to have a huge impact, economic impact on agriculture. And not only out in the rural areas, my friends, but also the metro area will benefit as well. And you take a look at the sheer number of farms and horses across the state, and a large portion of that is located right up here in the 7 to 9 county metro area. You take a look at the total direct and indirect economic impact that this has. The horse industry has over $1 billion economic impact in the state of Minnesota. And whether or not this affects your area, I'd ask you, you take a look at the horse-related expenditures. And any of this, if it's sold in your area, just ask that question. Feed and supplements, grain, hay, bedding, health and veterinarian care, boarding and training fees, farrier costs, breeding fees, labor, supplies, tack and clothes, fuel, insurance for the industry as well. You take a look at the assets. Take a look at the assets, whether it's land, fences, buildings, vehicles, tractors, equipment, tacking equipment and clothing once again, from saddles, bridles, halters, and the list goes on and on and on. And then you take a look at the related income to the individuals that are raising the horses and showing them, whether it's the sale of their horses, the training, sales preparation, boarding layups, manure sales, racing purses, stallion services, lessons, clinics, leasing animals, show winnings, tourism, trail riding, feed sales. I tell you what, it impacts every single one of us. And so that's what I'm saying once again. I want to thank Representative Kelly and Representative Hoppe for bringing this forward, and I appreciate the support.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, members, thank you. Since the racetrack in question that we're dealing with is actually 3 miles from my house, I've lived next to them for 26 years. I've watched the transition in ownership. I've watched what the current ownership has done to take a failing enterprise and turn it around, in spite of the fact that this place hobbles them at every turn. They can hardly even change the brand of paper towels in their bathrooms without coming to the legislature and asking for permission. In spite of that, they've continued to hold on and run a first-class operation. We've asked several times, members, to cut them some slack and actually run their business, let them respond to the needs in the marketplace. The bill that we have in front of us today is a small step in that direction. It will ensure that a first-class employer, a first-class business, someone who takes care of and does excellent work in being a great neighbor in northern Scott County, will continue to be here and flourish for just a couple more years. Members, I'd urge your support. I urge you to vote yes on the motion. Thank you.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, I notice that no one has responded to the questions that I've raised and the arguments that I've made. You all have these articles in your computer. I urge you to read them. The one today, the title of the one today is called Big Purses, Sore Horses, and Death. And, and the stories in it are just incredible. I admit none of them are from Minnesota. But if we are continuing following along in this path of increasing purses, of getting away from people who care about horses to people who care about money, we should have had a hearing in committee and we should have had these questions asked and answered. Representative Hamilton, I don't know if you had hearings in your committee on the horse racing industry, on does it have enough regulation, does it need more regulation. Whenever we hear someone saying that something needs to make more money, they're invariably calling for less regulation. There may be nothing wrong with this bill, but I'm saying that those questions have not been asked. And these two articles that I've put in front of you show that this is the direction that leads to problems, that increasing the size of the purses without regulations that relate the size of the purse to the value of the horses racing, that looking at what happens, at what incentive is given to race even lower quality horses is a serious problem. And I'm not saying that those problems do exist in Minnesota. I'm just saying that the people who are voting yes on this bill have not looked at it and are not able to answer those questions. So again, I urge a no vote on the bill.
Gentleman from Washington, Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think most people know I'm not a big proponent of the Racino, but I am a big supporter of the horse industry and agriculture. And in the past, I have carried legislation for the horse boarding industry, and so I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Gentleman from Cottonwood, Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. When it comes to animal welfare, my cousin directly, he works with training animals, and when it comes to the reiners and cutters and stuff like this. I went out to Canterbury and I went back into the stables and I talked with the trainers and the individuals that cared for the animals back there as well. And they do care. I mean, legitimately, this is their livelihood. And to do anything to jeopardize the health, the safety, or anything to the animal is counterproductive to who they are and what they do, and to the industry as well. And when it comes to negative press or anything like that, they know how this impacts and reflects on all of them. So once again, to have shortcuts or to abuse the animals or to do anything in that light is very counterproductive. And like I said, they do care about the animal, they care about the industry, and they care about their image. Thank you.
The gentleman from Carver. The lady from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to vote for this, but I have some questions for the author of Section 2, Subdivision 9. So would Representative Hoppe yield for a question or two?
Chairman Hoppe will yield. The lady from Mille Lacs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hoppe, I'm reading Section 2, Subdivision 9, about this written agreement that cannot be valid or effective unless it's approved by the Commission. Is that our Racing Commission?
The gentleman from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Erickson. That is my understanding, yes.
The lady from Mille Lacs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And another question, Representative Hoppe, this agreement is only enforceable in state court, and tribes try their own civil cases, but criminal cases go into state court because of Public Law 280. So did you have legal counsel review this to make sure that this statement that agreements are enforceable only in state courts is legitimate?
The gentleman from Carver will yield. The gentleman from Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Erickson. I did not It is my understanding that legal counsel, more than one legal counsel, has looked at this language in the agreement, and I have not heard from any attorneys that are not okay with it, but I personally did not have any legal counsel look at it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm not sure I can vote for this based on some of the text in subdivision 9 of section 2, because I know that when there are written agreements between two different governments, in this case tribal and state government, that there are some very specific issues that have to be addressed for this agreement to be reached. Furthermore, the licensee, I presume, would be a licensee such as Canterbury, where there are live races, but it would also be at other racetracks across the nation. And in my research, I've not been able to find maybe but one where this has been tried. So I'm going to have to think about this carefully before I cast my vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from McLeod, Representative Szymanski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, two issues here. The one on animal health and safety. As a livestock breeder, I know full well that an animal owner or breeder does not want to see or lose his animal, whether it be a racehorse or a cow or any other animal. So they will not jeopardize or risk the investment that they have in that commodity just to win a race, when the race prize is probably much less than the value of the animal itself. But I also want to comment about the jobs aspect of this bill. Having worked for the construction company that built a lot of the facilities at Canterbury Park, the horse stables, if you will, those buildings are, well into their life cycle and need to be refurbished and redeveloped. And I see this bill as an opportunity to put additional funds in the industry so that in the years to come they can restore and revamp the horse stables at Canterbury Park and the other racetrack, and in essence create jobs for our construction industry as well. For that reason, Mr. Speaker and members, I encourage a green vote on this bill.
The gentleman from Myhra, Representative Urdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm not personally much of a gambling advocate. When I go to the casinos, it's mainly to go to the buffet. Whatever I can find there. But because of the importance of this bill to the horse industry and its impact on jobs and Minnesota agriculture, I'm going to vote for the bill.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion to the Senate amendments? The clerk will take the roll. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Any further discussion on the Senate amendments? Now the clerk will take the roll. Excuse me.
Give the third reading.
Let's do this first. Third reading.
Third reading, House File 2795, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, going back to my earlier theme, think about now the discussion that you've heard. We've had a little bit of discussion on this, and what we've heard from the author is a number of things that he doesn't know. So we've got a bill before us that the author simply can't answer some of the important questions that the members have been asking because there were no hearings. Mr. Speaker, I'm pausing to let the body quiet down because there's a lot of noise going on.
Members, if you could please take your conversations to the back alcove or the retiring room, please, so we can hear the debate. Members? The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, The author of the bill couldn't answer how the money gets to the industry, and I know there's some other members talked about that. Maybe some of that discussion should have been had in committee, but it was not, at least not this year, not in context of the bill that's before us. He didn't know which tribes are supportive of this deal, and we heard about a couple of that are, but the author couldn't tell us who is. He hadn't heard that any are opposed. He wasn't able to tell us that for sure. And most importantly, I thought Representative Erickson raised a very important question about the legality of some of the language that's in this bill. And because there was no process here, no opportunity for that good question to be asked at a time when this bill could have been amended, that question is not answered. So you're voting on a bill that you don't know if it's legal, and you don't know really who might be supporting it and who might be against it. And members, I am really disappointed that this is the process that we're here with today. And I'm not saying that this isn't good for the horse industry. I don't know whether it is or it isn't. I just know that if this is the way we're going to conduct ourselves around here, you know, what's the point of having all these expensive hearings we have and taking all the time that we take? You know, we can just, if the advocates for something just speak to one of the members, and then that member can tell their caucus or stand up on the floor and tell everybody that they understand who's for it, who's against it, and what their reasons are. I guess that's all we need. Because if you're voting for this bill, that's what you're voting for today. So please vote no.
The gentleman from Anoka, Chairman Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not to minimize the value of Representative Liebling's comments, but I'm happy she wore red today so you could recognize her when she stood up on third reading to get to be recognized. So I just wanted to point out the system did work, at least this time, so we can celebrate that moment.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess to allay any concerns there might be about what you're voting for here today, what you're voting for is to allow an existing business to expand its business, just like you would vote to say Target can move a distribution center to this state. This is a publicly owned company at Canterbury Park, so the transparency is there. This is about our horse industry. And I'll tell you, Representative Khan, I may have a little bit closer connection to the horse industry than you. My first job out of college was as a horse ranch manager. And I spent time with quarter horses. I spent time with draft horses. We've owned quarter horses in my life, my wife and I and my family. So I know a little bit about these horse breeders. I know a little bit about selling hay. I know a little bit about buying feed for these horses. And I understand the love that these owners have for their horses. These horses, members, are athletes. They are no less athletes than you see anywhere else in the sports industry. And their owners certainly take care of them and want the best for them. And so, members, rest assured, when you vote yes, when you put a yay vote to this bill, you are doing what's best for the horse industry, for the horses themselves, for people who raise them, for the agrarian economy of the state of Minnesota, and quite frankly, for freedom to expand a business. That's what this is about. It's the freedom to expand a business, a legitimate business in the state of Minnesota, and the jobs that result from that freedom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Khan.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Woodward, I don't think you personally know a great-granddaughter of Secretariat. Clearly the best racehorse, the most important racehorse we've ever had in this country. But everything that everyone has said has just emphasized the points that are being made in these New York Times articles. When you increase the amount of money that's coming in through something unrelated to horses like gambling, you increase the incentive to run poorer horses, you increase when you don't have rules that don't allow, that limit the purse so that the purse can't be a certain amount more than the value of the horse, you encourage people to run horses that might be injured, might be fatal, that might be fatally injured. I'm just saying that the issues that increasing gambling raises for the racetrack, even though this isn't as much as other things that have been discussed, have not been adequately vetted in committees, and I think that we should vote no on this bill until that that happens. And everything that everyone has said has just emphasized the points that I'm making from the New York Times article, that trainers care about horses. Yes, they do, but when you put money in place, then it interferes with that. And we don't, this could be handled by different regulations or laws about drugs, or we could have people, drugs that can be administered, or we could have people tell us at least why it's not necessary. But I think that this was because this was a bill that we did not get to look at and discuss in any serious way, since obviously I can't ask for any amendments at this time. I can only ask for a no vote. This is obviously inadequate treatment of a bill, that was worth 4 pages or more in the New York Times, which is a serious treatment of a subject.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just rise to respond to Representative Woodard. His argument seems to be that it's okay to expand gambling because you're helping a business. If you want to take that kind of logic, you can do anything now in the state of Minnesota to help, as long as you can say that it helps an industry. I mean, where does that stop? Talk about a slippery slope. And I don't think that expanding gambling in Minnesota is like doing something that helps a business like Target. I'm sorry. I just think that's really straining things a little bit too far. So I'm sorry to get up again, but I just had to say that. I don't think the Target Corporation can be really compared to expanding gambling in Minnesota to help an industry.
Any further discussion? Gentleman from Goodhue, Representative Kelly.
Mr. Speaker, members, and Representative Liebling, you talk about needing to be concerned. I'm not concerned at all. In fact, I'm excited. When I got here 4 years ago, I had kind of resigned myself to the fact that I'd have to be at odds with a group of people and an entity and organization that I didn't even have a chance to converse with or have a conversation with. And I do believe that we've talked about this issue even long before I got here. So we've had the debate, we've had the conversation in many, many committees about this same subject. But I'm excited. I think kind of my MO here has been to work with many members across the aisle if we've got a tough situation to come and try and work it out together. And that's where we see the green votes and good things being done. Right now we have an opportunity that I'm excited for. I'm excited for the horse industry. I'm excited for the Indian gaming community because I think this can do nothing but mend some ties that have been broken and create conversations with groups of people that have never sat down at the same table. So I'm excited about this legislation, and I would urge a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion. The gentleman from Carver, Chairman Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I want to thank a number of people here today. I think this has been a very good discussion. I want to start with Representative Kelly and all the work that he has done to be a mediator, to try to bring some closer ties between a couple of groups of people that haven't necessarily always gotten along well for the last few years. I want to thank Representative Thiessen and Atkins and members on both sides of the aisle for their understanding. There has been a lot of good discussion on this issue, both for and against the issue. And I will tell you, Representative Kahn, I agree with you. I sat down and talked to you before we voted on this. I read that New York Times article that day that it came out, and we do need to keep an eye on that. And I will make my commitment to you. If I get back here next year, I will be happy to co-author any legislation with you that you want if we start seeing Minnesota go down the path of some of the other states that were referenced in that article. I am happy to stand here on the floor to tell members that our state, our racing industry, our horse raising industry in this state was not mentioned in those articles. I don't think it will be, and I think as a result of this legislation, and Representative Kahn and I respectfully disagree, at least I think it's respectful, it is on my part, I think we respectfully disagree on this issue. I don't think this is going to be a problem in Minnesota because I think our facilities that operate racing, our people that raise horses, and our racing commission are going to work like crazy to make sure that this doesn't ever happen the way that it was referenced in the New York Times article. I think this is a positive step forward for all of us, for the horse racing industry in the state of Minnesota, and members, I would appreciate your support.
Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 97 ayes and 34 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to. For what purpose does the lady rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a fiscal calendar announcement. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it is my intention to place House File 1752 and Senate File 1808 on the fiscal calendar for Monday, April 30th, 2012. That's the House bonding bill and the Lanning pension bill.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker and members, it is my sad duty to inform you of the news that on Sunday, April the 29th, another of Minnesota's finest gave their life in service to their country. 23-year-old Sergeant Nicholas DeCoute, an Army forward observer in the 82nd Airborne, was killed in battle in southern Kandahar. It was Sergeant DeCoute's second deployment. He was a resident of Stewartville, Minnesota, and a 2007 graduate of Stewartville High School. His mother and stepfather, Mr. and Mrs. Carson, both of Stewartville, were also in the Army and said their son had joined out of sense of serving his country. Mr. Speaker, I ask we observe a moment of silence that we might give tribute to the ultimate sacrifice of this young man and pay our respect to his family.
Members, please stand for a moment of silence. For what purpose does the lady rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
First year, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first year I was here in the legislature, I had the pleasure of meeting my LA for the first time, Jan Horner. She's worked for the House for over 25 years, very experienced. Anyway, as time went on, she not only was my LA, she also became a good friend. Last week, her father passed away, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. Raymond H. Peterson was a World War II veteran who served in the U.S. Marine Corps during Pearl Harbor. He volunteered to serve his country when he was only 19 years old. He served in the Pacific in many areas, including Iwo, Midway, and Guadalcanal. He learned carpentry from his father, who immigrated from Sweden. His mother was 15 years old when she came on the boat from Norway to Ellis Island, owning a single wooden trunk bearing her initial on the top. He was a member of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America for over 50 years. He was buried today at 10 a.m. at Fort Snelling, and I'd like us to observe a moment of silence in honor of Jan Horner's father.
Members, please rise for a moment of silence. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate House File 1721. Gunther, Murray, and Mahoney. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1652. Sanders, Doubt, and Nelson. Message from the Senate. This is the Myhra motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2647, an act relating to education. Myhra moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2647 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
I recognize the author, the lady from Dakota, Representative Myhra, to explain the Senate amendments.
Mr. Speaker, that is my motion, and subsequent to this House file passing here with a 131-0 vote, there were some concerns raised by a variety of school groups. Those concerns were addressed, and the Senate had Amendment 11. With that amendment, we now have the okay or support, or I should say the okay, of Education Minnesota, the Elementary and Secondary Principals Association, K-12 Superintendents, the League of Minnesota Cities, Association of Minnesota Counties, and MICA, Minnesota Inter-County Association. Supporters include Minnesota Newspaper Association, parents, and taxpayers who want transparency. The amendment that was added in the Senate takes 3 words out of line 2.3. We had all of the before specific reasons. Those 3 words were removed. Also, at the end of the bill, there was some language added to modify the information that would be public for those individuals that are in local political subdivisions. Members, I would ask for your green vote and repassage of this bill.
Is there any discussion on the Senate amendments? The lady from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Representative Myhra for her work with the Senate on that amendment. I did have concerns raised in my school district about whether any unsubstantiated complaint might be made public, and there was concern that that might have been the implication of the original language, and that was an issue we had not discussed in committee or on the floor. So I'm glad that compromise was arrived at, and I appreciate your efforts.
Is there any further discussion on Senate amendments? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to concur with the Senate amendments say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading as amended by Senate.
3rd reading, House File 2647, as amended by the Senate.
3rd reading as amended by Senate. Is there any further discussion? The lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think this is a really important bill to support. I believe, and I think it's been confirmed by the Department of Administration, that Burnsville School District should have coughed up the information to begin with. But this bill expands disclosure of settlements to other employee groups that we've been trying to do for years. And it's my hope that Representative Myhra now has the data practices bug and will pick up on a lot of these issues moving forward. Appreciate a green vote.
Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1656. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1656, number 23 on the calendar for the day, the second engrossment, an act relating to education.
The author of the bill, the lady from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1656 requires that there be legislative approval of any changes, revisions to the academic standards or graduation requirements after they've gone into rulemaking. Actually, it's just an affirmation of what's already in statute. When we first began this pursuit of standards for graduation requirement in Minnesota, we added subdivision 3 to 120B.021, which states that once the standards are initiated and implemented, and that occurred in 2003, that legislative approval was required for any revisions or changes. I ask for your support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1656.
Third reading. The lady from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I recommend a no vote on this bill. We already do have the ability as a legislature to trump rulemaking if we don't like it by passing a law to supersede it, and this bill requires the legislature to act, and I think that's not a good way to increase the rulemaking process. It will politicize the process, and I would urge a no vote.
Discussion. The gentleman from Steele, Representative Kath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I, too, rise to ask for a red vote on this piece of legislation. As it's moving forward, and as I've spoken with so many teachers across the state of Minnesota on the new standards that are emerging under the social sciences, they really like the pathway that these standards have taken. The fact that they've actually reduced the number, they have looked at some of these, what we call enduring understandings, and that they have depoliticized the process. That they've really put forward a process that has all of the stakeholders, and that is the people that are going to be utilizing these standards within the classrooms to actually push them forward. And when these are brought forward, they bring everybody together to fully vet these standards, and those conversations are what guides us in a non-political way for how it is that we teach our kids in the state of Minnesota. What this will do is politicize the process. This will actually make it more controversial and will not allow us to do what we really need to be doing, and that is empowering those who are truly going to utilize these standards in our classrooms. So I ask members to please cast a red vote. There's already oversight that can be done. We in the committee process can, if there are any problems, we can step forward on this. But what this is going to do is actually create more bureaucracy on this, and I would ask for a red vote. Thank you.
Discussion. The lady from Mille Lacs, Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, you know, I find this most interesting. I mean, I knew that Representative Greiling would make a statement, but it's interesting because I know she has supported, and I think I heard that in her answer, that there'd be legislative approval before rules are put in place. But the reason I find this interesting is that in committee and in small group, I have found a frustration in the fact that here in Minnesota we keep not only adding standards, even though the social studies standards may have diminished in number, we keep adding. Think of what we did with language arts a few years ago, also with math, And the frustration I hear from teachers is that we have so many standards that why aren't we taking a look at this ever-growing number of standards? And then, of course, the standards have to be placed in rule, because that is the procedure that's done in this body, before they can be implemented in our classrooms. But members, if we're going to get back to a time when we have more of a say in how we can assist our public school teachers and our students without a constant revision cycle that no longer is really revision, it's a complete overhaul. It happened with language arts in the acceptance of Common Core. It happened with math. We did not accept Common Core, but it's still a huge change. And now there will be social studies, and I know the department anticipates working on science standards. So I think common sense tells us that it is time for us to rein in what is happening with standards and to take a look at our graduation requirements, maybe get rid of the credit system, and I think that the passage of this provision will promote those discussions. I ask for a green vote.
Erickson asked for a red vote. Discussion. A green vote. Discussion. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Green votes no. There being 71 ayes and 61 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Motions and resolutions. The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Leader Dean moves that the calendar for the day be continued. All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on the motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail. Announcements. The gentleman from Hennepin, Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did we make a motion to the recess motion yet? Parliamentary inquiry?
No, we have not.
So if Leader Dean will yield for question, are we coming back at 10 tomorrow? You can even just nod your head.
The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean, will yield. Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, Representative Thiessen, you're asking a question?
Yeah.
Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just asking what time, I'm a little premature here, what time we're going to be coming back tomorrow.
The gentleman from Washington, Leader Dean.
10 a.m.
The gentleman from Hennepin.
Thank you. The DFL will caucus at 9 a.m. tomorrow up in room 316.
Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. May 1st, 2012.
Leader Dean moves that when the House adjourn until 10 a.m. May 1st, 2012. All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Leader Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. We are adjourned until 10 a.m., May 1st, 2012.